Today we have a 2001 Dodge Dakota V8 four-wheel drive. We're going to be changing the upper ball joints. And these have the factory ball joints in them. You can see it has the rivets. New ball joints do come with bolts to replace the rivets. Unfortunately, if they've not been replaced before, your only choice is to grind these off, pound them out. So I'm not going to go through everything and showing you that, but I will stop and give you some clips along the way to show you progress, and we'll get this replaced. Okay, now we've got one ground off, and if you look closely, you can see the shape of the shaft of that rivet. That's how far you want to take that down. You have to get it down that far, otherwise when you go to take this thing off, it is not going to go. So you have to get all the head off until you see the outline of that rivet shaft. And that's how far you got to go. Now before I go any further, I am going to go ahead and take the cotter pin out and loosen this bolt and give it a smack with a hammer just to get this loose, because it's going to be a lot easier to do it while this is attached to the truck than it is when it's not. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen this, and I'm going to go ahead and grind the rest of these two off before I'm back. Now understand, when you're using a grinder to do this, it's going to take you 5 or 6 minutes per rivet. So take your time, let the grinder do the work. Understand it's going to take a little bit. Get yourself a wet rag and hang it here, because as you can see, it's burnt quite a bit. These sparks will fly everywhere, and make sure you wear safety glasses or you go blind doing this, because they'll ricochet around on the inside of the fender well and they'll come back at you. So make sure you get a wet rag or a towel or something and lay it over here. Make sure you don't catch anything on fire, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, before I start grinding anymore, I just want to show you I did get this loose. I took the cotter pin out. I gave it 2 hard whacks right there with a little mini sledge, and it popped right off. So just get yourself one of the persuaders and give it a smack right there a couple hard times, and that thing will pop right off, so don't be scared of that. I'm going to get grinding and I'll be back. Okay, rivet number 2 is ground down. And as you can see with the outline of the shaft there. And we're going to do number 3. Alright, now the next step to getting this off, especially if you don't have an air hammer, take your jack and put it on the lower ball joint, and then start jacking the truck up. And you should see it start wanting to separate up there when you get to the top. If you don't, you will see that it does have a lot of stress on it. So what I'm going to do, since it didn't come off, is I'm just going to take a hammer and a chisel to it, and it'll start coming off. Okay, so we've got it off, and when you go to get this off, when you are trying to mess with it with a chisel, after it shows sign that it's starting to break free from the rivets, hit it with the little mini sledge right here, and it'll put the upper ball joint in a bind on this, and it'll pry it right off. So remember that when you go to hit it with a mini sledge, don't hit the ball joint, hit the top of the A-arm, and it'll pry that ball joint right off. Now we are left with these. Now what we have to do is, on the bottom side you still have those rivets, just like we did on the top. So what we're going to do is we're going to grind these flat now. Now, since we're at the A-arm, of course, we can't grind too deep. We just want to grind it right down until it's flush on all 3. Okay, we've got one of these ground off, and I just made it flush. I didn't really take off any material on the A-arm. I just got the shaft of that down flush. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take something like this, and I'm going to place it right on there, and I'm going to give it a smack with that little mini sledge, and that'll pop right out. Okay, so you can see that's out now. It took about 3 or 4 hits. I didn't have to take big swings at it or anything, but 3 or 4 hits, it popped right out. I'm going to do the rest right now. Alright, the other two came out real easy. 1 or 2 hits a piece, popped right out. So now we have this nice clean area, but we don't want to leave it that way because we do have shiny metal there. So what we're going to do is just take some Rust-Oleum rust barrier. It's frame paint. You can paint over bare metal even if it's got a little rust on it, so we don't have to worry about cleaning up too much. And we're just gonna give that a quick coat, nice and thick, so we don't have to worry about it. And we're done. Now we're gonna work on putting in the new upper ball joint. Here's our new upper ball joint. Comes with everything we need. We have our 3 bolts to replace our rivets with our 3 locking nuts. We have our cotter pin and our bottom nut and our grease cert that goes in the top here. I'll show you how to grease it before we're all done, but it's pretty simple. You're going to start off by just laying this down right where the old one was, bolting it in. I would suggest putting the bolts up through the bottom and have them stick through the top, just because we know that there's nothing up at the top that's going to interfere with the suspension or anything else. It just keeps everything out of the way. If you feel confident doing it the other way, go for it. Now on these, I know a lot of people I've seen are using Mastercraft. If you use Mastercraft, the boots on them are very thin and crappy, and you'll be replacing them often. The Precision Chassis one, the boots are better, and that's really what makes these ball joints last longer, is just being able to contain that grease in there and keep that joint safe. So spend the extra couple of bucks and get the Precision or a Moog, something better than the house brand, because you're going to be replacing it in another year or two, and it's too much of a pain in the ass to do that. So let's just do it right the first time. All right, we now have it together. It's bolted in. It's got the cotter pin. It's got the grease cert. It's all bolted in. Now what we're going to do is grease it. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to make this bulge a little bit. But what we want to make sure of is that we don't have any pressure on the suspension when we do it at first. So I'm going to let this down back on the jack stand. Let all the weight come off of it. And we're going to grease it there. So now I've greased it, and then I put pressure on the suspension again, and you can see it's got kind of a solid feel to it now. When you push on the side, you can feel it. So this is kind of the way you want it to look. I might put a little bit more in this, but you don't want to make that thing bulge, because when pressure gets put on it, it'll pop that, and then you've got to replace your ball joint again. So just make sure there's a good amount of grease in there. You're not trying to create pressure within that boot. That's what causes these things to blow out and go bad. So as far as everything's concerned, we're all done. I'm going to put the wheel on and be done with it. Now, those of you that are watching this, and you may have a rack and pinion boot that's messed up, and if you have a four-wheel drive, then you've probably found out that you can't buy these. You see that mine's nice and new right there. This is not a new rack and pinion. Even though they don't tell you, you can use a two-wheel drive boot on a four-wheel drive rack and pinion. The only difference is where it fits right here. It's a little hard to get on the four-wheel drive. The boot's going to be a tiny bit smaller for a two-wheel drive, so you do have to just figure out how to work it on this back side. But once you get it on, everything else fits nice and tight. So if you're trying to figure out how to get that done, just go buy a two-wheel drive one and work it on.